Khabane Lame had built an empire on silence. With nothing more than a shrug, a deadpan stare, and two open hands slicing through the absurdity of life hacks, he became the most followed man on TikTok. Brands clamored for his attention. A-list celebrities reposted his videos. His face, that expression of exasperated simplicity, was plastered across billboards, phone screens, and late-night comedy skits. He had no catchphrase, but everyone knew what he stood for. Common sense, minimalism, authenticity. But on an unusually grey morning in Milan, Khabane stepped out of a sleek black car and into a sea of cameras with a different expression. Tight-lipped, eyes downcast, brows creased with something the public hadn't seen before. Fear. The headlines were merciless. TikTok's silent star accused of fraud. Khabane Lame under investigation, social media empire at risk. The truth behind. The silence. It started as a whisper on the back end of a digital audit. A mid-level analyst at the European Anti-Fraud Office noticed irregularities in a charitable foundation Khabane had publicly supported, one that promised scholarships to African youth pursuing tech and design. Large sums had disappeared. The signature on the wire transfers matched Khabane's. When the news broke, it hit like a sledgehammer. Fans were shocked. Skeptics nodded knowingly. And Khabane? He remained, as always, silent. But this time, silence wasn't an asset. It was an accusation. He sat in a courtroom 2 days later, flanked by lawyers who spoke more than he ever had in his entire career. His family, flown in from Senegal, sat in the back. His mother clutched a prayer bead between her fingers, whispering invocations under her breath. Khabane's team insisted it was all a misunderstanding, a forged document, a misused platform. He had endorsed the charity, yes, but he hadn't touched a cent. The paperwork, they said, would clear his name, but the court wasn't so sure, nor was the public. Trust once earned can vanish faster than a trending sound. Even his closest collaborators began to distance themselves. A major tech brand paused their partnership. His PR manager quit for personal reasons. And the very platform that made him famous began to suppress his content in algorithmic limbo. But Khabane wasn't panicking. He was remembering. He was remembering his father's small workshop back in Chivasso, where he first learned how to fix broken phones. He was remembering the nights he spent watching his friends grow famous online while he worked as a factory machine operator, barely scraping by after losing his job during the pandemic. And most of all, he was remembering why he started. Not for fame, but for the truth behind simplicity. Now he was being told he'd helped launder nearly $1.2 million through a fake non-profit. The figure made his stomach turn, not because he feared prison, though the charges were serious, but because it betrayed the very image he had spent years quietly building. Not perfect, not rich, just real. Outside the courthouse, a single protester held a handmade sign, "Khabane, say it's not true." Another cried into a microphone, "We trusted you." For the first time, Khabane considered breaking the silence, but he didn't. Not yet. As the judge adjourned the session, setting the trial for 3 weeks later, Khabane stood still. Cameras flashed. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. He didn't respond, just raised his hands in the same open-palmed gesture that had once made the world laugh, but this time there was no joke. There was only a question. What if everything they thought they knew about him was wrong? The courtroom was colder than Khabane remembered. 3 weeks had passed since the initial hearing, and each day chipped away at the solid wall of calm he had built around himself. He hadn't posted on TikTok since the scandal broke. His last video, a simple takedown of a man trying to crack an egg with a spoon, sat frozen in time at the top of his page. Millions of likes, but now the comments had turned. "You let us down." Guess the silence was guilt all along. Another fake idol. Khabane stared at the bench where the judge now sat. The prosecution had come armed with fire. Copies of signed transfer documents, video clips of Khabane endorsing the charity, and a witness, the foundation's founder, a man named Matteo D'Alba, now under house arrest. Matteo had once been a friend. Or so Khabane thought. They had met at a social entrepreneurship summit in 2022. Matteo pitched a vision of education, empowerment, and opportunity for underprivileged African youth. He spoke Khabe's language, not just Italian, but hope, and... So Khabe had offered his platform, his name, his face. But he never asked where the money was going. He never saw the back end. He was, in his words to his lawyer, naive. The prosecution called it willful ignorance. Their case hinged on the idea that Khabe had used his celebrity to funnel legitimacy into a fake organization. Knowingly or not, the law didn't care. His lawyer, a sharp and seasoned Milanese woman named Alessia Ferretti, fought back. There is no direct evidence Mr. Lame orchestrated or benefited from the fraud, she argued. What we see is a young man exploited for his image, not a criminal mastermind. But the prosecutors were relentless. He allowed his fame to be monetized. He signed the endorsements, he attended the galas, he cashed the trust of millions. Khabe listened, jaw clenched. Each word felt like a slow unraveling of everything he'd built. He wasn't just fighting a charge, he was watching his identity be dissected in front of strangers. Outside the courthouse, media vans lined the streets. Hashtags trended globally. Khabe on trial, silent scandal, truth or influence. Behind closed doors, he broke down for the first time. "I didn't know, Alessia," he whispered. "I swear to God I didn't know." She didn't respond with comfort, not immediately. She studied him. "Then prove it," she said. "Not to the court. To yourself." Back at his apartment, the silence was suffocating. The walls were covered in framed photos, magazine covers, fan art, posters from events. But they felt distant. Now, like artifacts of someone else's life. His phone buzzed. A message from his younger brother. "People are saying stuff at school. Some teachers are defending you, some not," followed by, "Still proud of you, bro." Khabe stared at the screen until the words blurred. For years, his silence had been his power, a protest against noise, against absurdity. Now, it felt like a prison. Alessia had advised him not to speak publicly during the trial, but a part of him, the part that had once wanted to fix broken things with simple truth, wondered if staying quiet was the biggest mistake of all. He opened his laptop not to post, not yet, but to go back. Emails, agreements, digital trails. Somewhere there had to be proof of his innocence or of how deeply he had been manipulated. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. His heart pounded like a drumbeat beneath the calm. He wasn't just a meme anymore. He was a man fighting for the truth behind his own story. Khabe's apartment had turned into a war room. Files were scattered across the dining table, digital printouts, contracts, emails, even screenshots from old Instagram DMs. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours in days. The once pristine, minimalist space now mirrored the chaos in his mind. Then, on the 5th night of his search, it came, an email dated over a year ago, buried in a folder labeled PR Inquiries. The subject, Urgent, Matteo's request. He clicked. It was from Matteo's assistant, their request to retroactively backdate Khabe's endorsement contract to make it appear as if he'd been part of the foundation earlier than he actually had, supposedly for continuity in donor reports. Khabe had never responded. There was no signature, but it was proof that they had manipulated timelines. He forwarded it to Alessia immediately. Within minutes, she replied, "We may have just found your lifeline." At the next hearing, Alessia stood taller. She introduced the email as evidence, arguing that Khabe had been misled and his name co-opted into something far more sinister than he ever agreed to. The court took note. The mood in the room shifted, but it wasn't the only surprise. During cross-examination, Matteo Dalba broke. Pressed by Alessia's unrelenting logic, Matteo confessed to forging Khabe's signature on 3 wire transfers. His voice cracked. "He didn't know," he muttered. "He trusted me. I used that." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge ordered a recess and the courtroom emptied in stunned silence. Outside, reporters sprinted to update their scripts. And inside, Khabe finally allowed himself to breathe. But something still didn't sit right. Later that night, Alessia took him aside. The judge was moved, but this doesn't erase everything. You were still the face of the campaign. The law can be merciful, but it's rarely kind. Khabe nodded. He understood now that even innocence came with consequences, that even trust given in good faith could be punished if given carelessly. He returned home to find his mother waiting on the balcony, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm air. "You never liked crowds," she said quietly in Wolof, their native tongue. "Why did you let them lift you so high?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "Because I didn't want to feel invisible anymore." She nodded. "Then don't disappear now." The next morning he made a choice. He recorded a video, not on TikTok, but on his phone. A single take. Just him. No filters, no edits, no performance. "Hello. I'm Khabe. I'm not here to entertain." "Today," he began. He explained everything. The foundation, the charges, the betrayal, and most of all, the silence. Not the one from his videos, but the deeper one. The silence of being misunderstood. Of watching the world write your story while you stood on the sidelines. The video lasted only 2 minutes. He posted it to Instagram and X with a single caption. "I owe you the truth." Within an hour it hit 1 million views, then 2, then 10. Comments flooded in. "We believe you. This is the Khabe we knew was real. Thank you for not hiding." But there were others too, still not buying it. Too little, too late. He read every one, and for the first time in weeks he didn't feel afraid. Because this wasn't about saving a brand anymore. It was about reclaiming his name. The final day of the trial began like a storm waiting to break. Outside the courthouse, crowds had returned. Not angry, not cheering, just watching. There was something reverent in their silence, something that made Khabe's chest tighten. For the first time, they weren't there for the meme. They were there for the man. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The courtroom was packed. Cameras were prohibited. But journalists scribbled furiously in notebooks and tapped on laptops. The judge, expression unreadable, glanced at the clock before calling the session to order. Khabe sat next to Alessia, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He looked calm, but his stomach churned. He wasn't afraid of prison. Not really. What terrified him was being forever known as a fraud. A face people laughed at, then forgot. The prosecution made their final arguments. They acknowledged Matteo Dalba's confession, but insisted Khabe bore moral responsibility, that his influence had enabled the scam, even if unintentionally. That his silence had functioned like complicity. Public figures, the prosecutor declared, must understand that fame does not absolve accountability. Mr. Lame stood beside a criminal and smiled for the camera. That smile cost donors over €1 million. The words stung more than expected. Then Alessia stood. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "Mr. Lame is not on trial for greed. He's on trial for trust, for believing in people, in causes, in hope. And yes, for not asking enough questions. But is that a crime? Or is that what so many of us do every day?" She turned to the judge. "He didn't steal. He didn't forge. He didn't orchestrate anything. He made a mistake, a human one. And since then, he has taken every step to make it right." Then came the final blow. A digital audit report Alessia had secured just the night before. It showed that Khabe had never received a single cent from the fraudulent charity. In fact, his team had made donations directly to several student scholarship recipients, unaware of the scam. The judge nodded. The courtroom murmured. Even the prosecutor looked shaken. And then, unexpectedly, the judge asked a rare question. "Mr. Lame," he said, "do you wish to speak before I deliver judgment?" All eyes turned to him. Khabe stood slowly. His palms were sweaty. He wasn't sure what to say, and only that he had to say something. Anything. He cleared his throat. "I never wanted to be famous," he began. "I just wanted to make people smile, that was it. I lost my job during COVID. I didn't have money. I didn't have a plan. I just had a phone and a face." He paused, scanning the room. "I believed in that charity. I believed in Matteo. I should have been more careful. I should have done more. That's on me." A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not his usual comedic exasperation, but real pain. "I didn't take any money, but I know people feel like I took something else. Their trust. and maybe that's harder to repay. But I'll spend my life trying if I have to. He sat down. The judge didn't respond. Not yet. He simply nodded and recessed for deliberation. The next 2 hours were torture. Khabe waited in a side room with Alessia. Neither spoke. Outside, reporters swirled like vultures. His phone buzzed again and again. He didn't check it. At one point, he thought about deleting everything. The apps, the accounts, the fame. Starting over. Disappearing. But then he remembered his brother's message. Still proud of you, bro. No matter what happened next, he had told the truth. He had faced them. He had faced himself. And in that moment, sitting alone, stripped of followers and filters, Khabane Lame felt something. Unexpected peace. When the judge returned to the bench, the air in the courtroom was so still. It felt like no one dared to breathe. Khabe didn't look up at first. His eyes were fixed on a small scratch in the wood of the defense table, a tiny imperfection, in a world that demanded so much perfection from people like him. Fame, he had learned, wasn't a gift. It was a magnifying glass, and today he was the one under it. The judge spoke with calm finality. After careful review of the evidence, testimony and character assessment, the court finds Mr. Khabane Lame not guilty of all criminal charges. Gasps and murmurs echoed like a wave through the room. But, the judge added, raising a finger, we do acknowledge a lapse in due diligence, a lesson not only for the defendant, but for all who wield influence. Let this be a reminder. Silence, though powerful in art, must never replace responsibility in life. And with that, the gavel struck. Khabe sat motionless, his breath caught in his chest. Not guilty, not destroyed, not erased. Beside him, Alessia exhaled and whispered, "It's over." But in Khabe's heart, he knew it wasn't. Not really. The trial might be over, but rebuilding trust, reputation, identity was only beginning. Outside, the world was already moving. The story had broken online. Headlines lit up screens across continents. Khabane Lame cleared in fraud case, betrayed but not broken. Silent star speaks out. Wins case, wins hearts. Back at his apartment that night, Khabe sat on the edge of his bed, the same way he had when all this began. His phone was full. Messages from influencers, brands, old friends. Some were apologies, some were opportunities. All felt hollow, until one message stood out. A video. From a village school in Senegal, the kids held up a handmade sign. Merci, Khabe. We believe in you. He cried for the first time, not because he was free, because he finally understood what his silence had always meant. Not just comedy, but connection. The next morning, Khabe did something no one expected. He deleted every video on his TikTok, then posted a new one. No punchline, no props. Just Khabe, standing in front of a chalkboard in a rural school. He wrote one word: rebuild. The camera zoomed in on his face. He looked into it not with irony but intention, and he spoke. I made people laugh by showing what didn't make sense. But life doesn't always make sense either. I stayed quiet because it was funny. But sometimes silence is not enough. Sometimes we need to speak. He paused. So from now on I will. The video went viral, not because it was clever, but because it was real. Comments flooded in. He's back and better. Growth looks good on you, Khabe. This is what redemption looks like. In the weeks that followed, Khabe started a new series, visiting small schools, interviewing children, amplifying their voices. He didn't care about followers anymore. He cared about truth. And slowly the world followed. He would never go back to being just a meme, the silent face, the viral joke. Now, he was something else, a man who had lost everything and found something deeper, not just his voice, but his purpose.